The crystal chandeliers of Whittington Hall cast a shimmering glow upon the polished marble floors below, where the cream of London society swirled in elegant patterns of silk, velvet, and whispered secrets. Snow fell gently outside the tall windows, transforming the formal gardens into a winter wonderland that mirrored the fantasy within. It was the most anticipated ball of the season, the Duke of Kensington's annual winter ball, an event where reputations were made and broken with equal measure. Miss Jane Lockwood stood pressed against the wall, as far from the dancing as propriety would allow. Unlike the other attendees who had spent weeks preparing for this night, she had received her invitation only yesterday, a hasty addition after her young charge, Lady Sophia, had begged her father to permit her governess to attend. "You cannot possibly expect me to navigate my first proper ball alone, Papa," Sophia had insisted. "Miss Lockwood must be there to guide me." The Earl of Westmoreland had relented, though Jane suspected it was merely to silence his daughter's persistent pleas. And so, here she stood, in a hastily altered gown of deep midnight blue, a cast-off from Lady Westmoreland's wardrobe from 3 seasons past. The modiste had worked through the night to make it presentable, taking in the waist and adding modest lace at the neckline to suit Jane's station. "You appear to be contemplating escape," came a voice to her right, causing Jane to start. Lady Helena Kittredge, the Dowager Countess of Harrington, eyed her with amused curiosity. "I cannot blame you. These affairs can be dreadfully tedious." Jane cursed quickly. "My lady, I was merely observing. This is my first ball." "Your first? At your age? How curious." The older woman's eyes narrowed. Though well into her 60s, Lady Helena remained one of society's most formidable figures, her tongue as sharp as the diamonds that adorned her wrinkled neck. "I am employed as Lady Sophia's governess," Jane explained. "I am here at her father's indulgence, to provide guidance to his daughter." "Ah, a governess at a ball. How unconventional." Lady Helena's mouth twitched. "Though you carry yourself well enough. You were not always a governess, I suspect." Jane felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I have been fortunate in my education, my lady." "Indeed." The dowager's attention shifted suddenly to the grand entrance. "Ah, the master of revelry arrives at last." Jane followed her gaze and felt her breath catch in her throat. Framed in the doorway stood the most commanding figure she had ever laid eyes upon. Tall and broad-shouldered, he surveyed the room with the quiet confidence of a man who owned not just the building, but every person within it. "His Grace, the Duke of Kensington," the footman announced, though the formality seemed almost redundant. The man's identity was unmistakable. "Marcus Kensington," Lady Helena murmured. 34 years old, unmarried, and possessing a fortune that makes even the Prince Regent appear a pauper by comparison. He inherited the dukedom at 25 after his father and brother perished in that dreadful boating accident. Jane nodded politely, though she had not requested this information. The Duke's reputation preceded him, a man of impeccable breeding, formidable intelligence, and a demeanor so cold it was said roses wilted in his presence. "They call him the Winter Duke," Lady Helena continued. "Cold as ice and twice as unyielding. 9 years, and he has yet to select a duchess, despite every eligible maiden being paraded before him like prized mares at auction." "Perhaps his Grace values his independence," Jane ventured. Lady Helena chuckled. "Independence is a luxury few in our circles can afford, my dear. Even dukes must eventually bow to duty." The orchestra struck up a new waltz, and Jane's attention returned to her charge. Lady Sophia was being led onto the dance floor by the young Viscount Pembroke. The girl's face was luminous with excitement, her golden curls bouncing with each step. "She appears to be managing admirably without your guidance," Lady Helena observed. "Yes," Jane agreed with a small smile. "Though I promised her father I would remain vigilant. The Earl of Westmoreland is known for his protective nature. His wife's passing left him quite bereft." The dowager's expression softened momentarily. 5 years now, and still he mourns her." Jane nodded. The late Countess's portrait hung in the main gallery at Westmoreland House, her gentle smile watching over the household she had left behind too soon. The music swelled, and Jane found her foot tapping lightly to the rhythm. It had been years since she had danced, not since those carefree days before her father's disgrace. Before the name Lockwood became associated with scandal and ruin. "You enjoy music," Lady Helena observed. "Very much," Jane admitted. "Yet you do not dance." "It would hardly be appropriate, my lady. I am here as Lady Sophia's companion, not a guest." The Dowager Countess raised an eyebrow. "Curious. In my experience, appropriate is merely what we decide it to be." Before Jane could respond, a disturbance near the refreshment table caught her attention. Lady Sophia, her face flushed with embarrassment, was attempting to extract herself from an increasingly persistent Lord Barton, a man known for his wandering hands and sizable gambling debts. "If you'll excuse me, my lady," Jane murmured, already moving through the crowd with as much speed as decorum would allow. She reached Sophia's side just as Lord Barton's fingers closed around the girl's wrist. "My lord," Jane said quietly but firmly, "Lady Sophia promised this dance to Lord Hatfield. He searches for her even now." Lord Barton's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "I was unaware governesses had the authority to arrange dance cards." "Not arrange, my lord. Merely remember," Jane replied smoothly. "Lady Sophia, your partner awaits." The relief on the young girl's face was palpable as Jane led her away from the scowling nobleman. "Thank you," Sophia whispered. He smelled of brandy and would not stop speaking of his hunting dogs. Jane suppressed a smile. "Perhaps seek partners with more varied conversational skills." "Like the Duke?" Sophia giggled, nodding toward where Marcus Kensington stood in conversation with the Foreign Secretary. "They say he can discuss everything from ancient Greek philosophy to the latest agricultural innovations." "I doubt his grace makes a habit of dancing with débutantes," Jane replied. "Now, shall we find Lord Hatfield to make honest women of us both?" As they moved through the crowd, Jane felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. She turned slightly, scanning the room, until her gaze collided with a pair of intense dark eyes. The Duke of Kensington was staring directly at her. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, neither looked away. There was a question in his gaze, curiosity, perhaps, that made Jane's heart flutter traitorously in her chest. Then Lady Sophia tugged at her sleeve, breaking the connection, and Jane hurriedly guided her charge toward the safety of the dance floor. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. Jane maintained her vigilant post, occasionally exchanging pleasantries with Lady Helena, who seemed to have adopted her as the evening's entertainment. Throughout it all, she was acutely aware of the Duke's presence, though she dared not look in his direction again. It was nearing midnight when disaster struck. Lady Sophia, flushed with excitement from dancing and the single glass of champagne Jane had permitted her, stumbled on the hem of her gown. She would have fallen had a strong hand not grasped her elbow, steadying her. "Careful, Lady Sophia," came a deep voice. "These floors can be treacherous." The Duke of Kensington himself had prevented her fall. Sophia blushed crimson. "Your Grace." "Thank you. I fear my dancing slippers are not as reliable as my riding boots." A flicker of amusement crossed the Duke's austere features. "A common complaint among young ladies, I'm told. Perhaps you should rest a moment." "Oh, I'm perfectly well, Your Grace. Miss Lockwood has been ensuring I don't overexert myself. She's terribly conscientious." The Duke's gaze shifted to Jane, who curtsied deeply. "Your Grace. Miss Lockwood." His voice rolled over her name with a richness that made it sound somehow more significant. "Lady Sophia speaks highly of you." "Her ladyship is generous with her praise," Jane replied, keeping her eyes appropriately lowered. "She is honest, which I value more." The Duke studied her with undisguised interest. "You are not what I expected in a governess." Jane felt her cheeks warm. "I strive to meet the Earl's expectations, Your Grace." "No doubt." His lips curved slightly. "Lady Sophia, I believe your father was looking for you near the terrace." The young girl's eyes widened. "Oh. I should go to him at once." "Miss Lockwood, will you?" "I shall ensure Miss Lockwood is not abandoned," the Duke Sophia hesitated only briefly before curtsying and hurrying away, leaving Jane alone with the most powerful man in the room. "Your Grace, I should walk with me, Miss Lockwood." It was not a request. Jane found herself being guided toward the less crowded gallery that adjoined the ballroom. Gossip would surely follow, but refusing the Duke of Kensington was unthinkable. "You are uncomfortable," he observed as they paused before a large landscape painting. "It is unusual for someone in my position to converse with someone in yours," Jane replied carefully. "Yes, the rigid hierarchies of our society." The Duke's mouth twisted. "Tell me, Miss Lockwood, do you find them as suffocating as I do?" The question startled her. I have learned to navigate within their constraints." A diplomatic answer. He studied her face. "You have the bearing of a lady, yet you serve as a governess. That suggests a story I would be interested to hear." Jane's hands tightened around her fan. "There are many women of good breeding who find themselves in need of employment, Your Grace." "Indeed. Though few carry themselves with such quiet dignity." His dark eye seemed to see past her careful facade. "You were watching the dancing earlier with such longing. Do you miss it?" "I have not danced in many years," she admitted. "A crime against grace itself, I suspect." The Duke extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" Jane stared at his outstretched hand in shock. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly, we are relatively private here," he countered. "And I find myself wearied by convention tonight." The impropriety of it was immense. Yet something in his gaze, a challenge, perhaps, or simply human connection in a world where she had known so little of it, made Jane place her gloved hand in his. The Duke led her in a simplified waltz, keeping a respectable distance between them despite the intimacy of the moment. He moved with surprising grace for such a powerful man, guiding her through the steps as though they had danced together countless times before. "You dance beautifully," he murmured. "As I suspected." "You are kind to say so." Jane kept her eyes fixed on his shoulder, acutely aware of the strength beneath the fine fabric of his evening coat. "I am rarely accused of kindness, Miss Lockwood." There was a wry note in his voice. "Fairness, perhaps. Honesty, certainly. Kindness? That is a virtue I admire but seldom practice. Perhaps you have not had sufficient opportunity, Your Grace." That drew a genuine smile from him, brief but transformative, revealing a dimple in his left cheek that humanized his aristocratic features. "Or perhaps I have lacked the right inspiration." The music from the ballroom changed, and they slowed to a stop. For a moment, they stood close, not touching, but connected by something Jane could not name. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Lockwood," the Duke said quietly. "The pleasure was mine, Your Grace." Jane curtsied, prepared to withdraw. "Before you go," he hesitated, an unusual show of uncertainty. "I host a small gathering at Kensington House tomorrow. A musical afternoon. Lady Sophia and her father are attending. I would be pleased if you accompanied them." Jane blinked in surprise. "I'm sure the Earl would prefer. I shall extend the invitation personally," the Duke interrupted. "Good evening, Miss Lockwood." With a bow, he was gone, leaving Jane alone with her racing thoughts and the lingering warmth of his hand on hers. "He did what?" Lady Sophia gasped the following morning, nearly spilling her tea. Jane shushed her, glancing toward the door of the schoolroom. "Please, my lady." It was merely a momentary diversion. His Grace was being kind to a wallflower. "The Duke of Kensington does not engage in acts of random kindness," Sophia declared. "Everyone knows he calculates every word, every gesture. If he danced with you, Miss Lockwood, he had a reason." Jane returned to arranging the books for the day's lessons. "The reason, I suspect, was pity." "Nonsense. The Duke does not know the meaning of the word." Sophia set down her cup decisively. "Did he speak to you?" "Briefly." "About what?" Jane sighed. "Nothing of consequence. Now, shall we begin with French translation or geography?" Sophia ignored the question. Papa says we are to attend a musical gathering at Kensington House this afternoon. Yes, I'm aware. Jane busied herself with the globe. Papa also said the Duke specifically requested your presence. Sophia's blue eyes sparkled with excitement. That is most unusual, Miss Lockwood. Before Jane could formulate a suitable response, the door opened, and the Earl of Westmoreland himself entered. Good morning, Sophia, Miss Lockwood. His kindly face was creased with concern. I hope I'm not interrupting lessons. We were just beginning, my lord, Jane assured him. Good, good. He twisted his signet ring nervously. Miss Lockwood, might I have a word with you in private? Sophia pouted but obediently left the room when Jane nodded to her. Once alone, the Earl gestured for Jane to sit. Miss Lockwood, you have been with us for nearly 2 years now, and in that time, you have proven yourself to be not only an excellent teacher but a steadying influence on my daughter. Thank you, my lord. I am fond of Lady Sophia. Yes, well. He cleared his throat. The Duke of Kensington has extended a particular invitation for you to accompany us to his home today. So I understand, my lord. If you feel it inappropriate, no. The Earl waved a hand. That is not my concern. Rather, I wonder. Has His Grace indicated any particular interest in you? Jane felt her face grow warm. His Grace was courteous enough to engage me in conversation last night, my lord. Nothing more. The Earl studied her for a long moment. Miss Lockwood, I am not unaware of your background. Jane felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. My lord? When I employed you, I made certain inquiries. I know your father was Sir Thomas Lockwood, once a respected barrister, before the scandal involving the Millerton estate funds. Jane's hands trembled slightly in her lap. Then you know of my family's disgrace. I know your father made a grave error in judgment, for which he paid dearly. I also know that you were once destined for a season of your own, before your family's circumstances changed. That was a lifetime ago, my lord. The Earl's expression softened. What I mean to say, Miss Lockwood, is that you are a gentlewoman by birth, despite your current station. If the Duke's interest is genuine, I would not stand in your way. Jane stared at him in shock. My lord, surely you misinterpret. The Duke of Kensington would never, the Duke rarely does anything without purpose, the Earl interrupted gently. I have known Marcus since he was a boy. If he has extended this invitation, he has his reasons. Jane didn't know how to respond. The idea was preposterous, a duke and a disgraced barrister's daughter who worked as a governess. It was the stuff of fairy tales, not reality. All I ask, the Earl continued, is that you be careful. Society can be cruel to those who step beyond their prescribed roles. I assure you, my lord, I am well aware of my place. Jane stood, smoothing her simple grey dress. May I fetch Lady Sophia to resume her lessons? The Earl nodded, looking somewhat relieved. Of course. We shall depart for Kensington House at 2 o'clock. After he left, Jane pressed a hand to her racing heart. Could the Duke truly have some interest in her? And if so, what did it signify? Kensington House stood like a gleaming palace amid its snow-covered gardens. The imposing limestone facade, with its perfectly symmetrical windows and grand entrance, spoke of wealth accumulated over centuries. Jane, seated across from Sophia and her father in the Earl's carriage, felt increasingly out of place. It's magnificent, isn't it? Sophia breathed as they approached. They say the picture gallery alone contains works worth more than our entire estate. Sophia, her father chided gently. It's impolite to discuss such matters. But it's true, isn't it, Papa? The Earl sighed. The Kensington fortune is substantial, yes. The current Duke has increased it significantly through wise investments. Jane listened silently, adjusting her bonnet, a modest creation of dark green velvet that matched her best day dress. She had dressed with unusual care, though she told herself it was merely respect for the Duke's home, not his person, that motivated her. Footmen in elaborate livery helped them alight from the carriage. Jane followed the Earl and Sophia up the marble steps, where the butler greeted them with practiced formality. The Earl of Westmoreland, Lady Sophia Westmoreland, and Miss Lockwood, he announced as they entered the music room. Perhaps 20 guests were already assembled, the ladies in afternoon finery, the gentlemen in formal day dress. Jane immediately spotted Lady Helena, who acknowledged her with a regal nod. And then the Duke was before them, resplendent in a perfectly tailored coat of midnight blue. Westmoreland, Lady Sophia. He bowed to each in turn before his gaze settled on Jane. Miss Lockwood. I'm pleased you could join us. Your Grace is most generous to include me, Jane replied softly. Something flickered in his dark eyes, amusement, perhaps. Not generosity, Miss Lockwood. Self-interest. I've been told you have an ear for music. Jane blinked in surprise. Yes, I play the pianoforte, though it has been some time. Excellent. We have a young violinist performing Beethoven today. I value the opinion of those with musical sensibilities. Before Jane could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of more guests, and the Duke was called away to his duties as host. Sophia gave Jane a meaningful look but said nothing as her father led them to their seats. The performance was exquisite. The young violinist, barely 16 years old, played with a passion that brought tears to Jane's eyes. When he finished the final movement of the sonata, the applause was enthusiastic and genuine. Remarkable talent, murmured a voice beside her. The Duke had materialized in the empty chair to her left. Extraordinary, Jane agreed. Such emotion in one so young. You were moved. It wasn't a question, but Jane nodded. Great music speaks to something beyond words, I think. Yet you express it beautifully. The Duke studied her profile. You play yourself, you said. In another life, Jane replied with a small smile. My mother insisted on lessons. Would you play for us? Jane's eyes widened. Your Grace, I couldn't possibly, I rarely ask twice, Miss Lockwood. There was no arrogance in his tone, merely statement of fact. Jane glanced at the Earl, who gave her an encouraging nod. Sophia was practically bouncing with excitement. One piece only, Jane conceded, rising from her seat. The magnificent Broadwood grand piano gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. Jane settled on the bench, took a steadying breath, and began to play. She chose Mozart, a sonata that had always brought her comfort in difficult times. Her fingers remembered the patterns despite the years of neglect, and soon she was lost in the music, her surroundings fading away. When the final notes died away, there was a moment of silence before applause filled the room. Jane rose, flustered by the attention, and curtsied. Beautifully played, the Duke said as she returned to her seat. You are too modest about your talents. You are too generous in your praise, Your Grace. His lips quirked. We have established I am not generous, Miss Lockwood. Merely truthful. After the music concluded, the guests moved to the adjoining room for refreshments. Jane found herself approached by Lady Helena once more. You play with feeling, Miss Lockwood, the Dowager observed. A rare quality in these days of technical proficiency without soul. Thank you, my lady. The Duke was quite captivated. Lady Helena's shrewd eyes missed nothing. I haven't seen him so attentive since the Prime Minister's address last session. Jane felt her cheeks warm. His Grace is a patron of the arts. His Grace is a patron of what interests him, Lady Helena corrected. And currently, that appears to be you. Before Jane could formulate a response, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A woman's voice, strident and commanding, rose above the genteel murmurs of conversation. I will not be turned away. I have every right to be here. The Duke moved swiftly toward the disturbance, his expression darkening. Jane watched as he confronted a strikingly beautiful woman in an elaborate gown of crimson silk. Lady Marianne, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite its lowered volume. You were not invited. Since when do I require an invitation, Marcus? The woman, Lady Marianne, placed a gloved hand on his arm. There was a time when your door was always open to me. The Duke removed her hand firmly. That time has passed, as you well know. A hush fell over the gathering as guests pretended not to listen while straining to hear every word. Who is that? Jane whispered to Lady Helena. Lady Marianne Pierce, the dowager replied with evident distaste. Widow of Lord Pierce. She and the Duke were close before her rather advantageous marriage 3 years ago. Jane watched as the Duke spoke quietly but firmly to Lady Marianne, who eventually departed with as much dignity as she could muster. When he returned to his guests, his expression was composed, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Forgive the interruption, he said smoothly. Lady Pierce was unaware today's gathering was by invitation only. The assembled company murmured appropriate responses, and conversation gradually resumed. Jane, however, could not help noticing the tension that remained in the Duke's shoulders. When it came time to depart, the Duke personally escorted their party to the entrance hall. Westmoreland, I have business matters to discuss with you. Perhaps you might call tomorrow morning. He spoke to the Earl, but his eyes lingered on Jane. Of course, Kensington. 10 o'clock. Perfect. The Duke turned to Sophia. Lady Sophia, your performance on the pianoforte improves each time I hear it. Sophia beamed. Thank you, Your Grace. Though I fear I shall never play as beautifully as Miss Lockwood. Few do, he agreed, finally addressing Jane directly. Miss Lockwood, it has been a pleasure. I hope we shall have the opportunity to discuss music again soon. You are most kind, Your Grace. Jane curtsied, keeping her eyes lowered. As they departed, Jane could feel the Duke's gaze following her. Something had shifted between them, something indefinable yet undeniable. It both thrilled and terrified her. The following week brought a flurry of unexpected invitations for the Earl's household. Lady Pembroke's literary salon, Lord Hartington's dinner party, the Countess of Dunmore's garden luncheon, and for each, the invitation specifically included Miss J. Lockwood, companion to Lady Sophia. It's most irregular, the Earl mused over breakfast, examining the latest invitation. Though not unwelcome, I suppose. Sophia benefits from exposure to society before her official coming out next year. Jane said nothing, though she suspected the sudden interest in her charge had less to do with Sophia and more to do with the Duke of Kensington's apparent interest in her governess. Society loved nothing more than a potential scandal. At Lady Pembroke's salon, Jane found herself engaged in a lively discussion about the merits of Gothic novels with several gentlemen of literary inclination. At Lord Hartington's dinner, she was seated near Lady Helena, who kept up a running commentary on the foibles of their fellow guests. And at the Countess's luncheon, she was approached by no less than 3 dowagers, all suddenly curious about her background and education. Through it all, the Duke maintained a careful distance, though Jane often felt his gaze upon her. When they did speak, it was with perfect propriety, brief exchanges about music, literature, or the weather. Yet each conversation left her breathless, as though they had discussed matters far more intimate than Wordsworth's latest poem. It's the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed, Sophia declared one afternoon as Jane helped her practice embroidery. The Duke is clearly smitten with you. Lady Sophia, please. Jane threaded a needle with blue silk. His Grace has shown me common courtesy, nothing more. Common courtesy. Sophia laughed. Is that why Lady Marianne Pierce glared at you throughout the Hartington dinner? Or why Lady Helena has suddenly become your greatest champion? Even Papa notices it. Jane's hand stilled. Notices what, precisely? The way the Duke watches you when he thinks no one is looking. Sophia's eyes gleamed. Like you're a complex mathematical equation he's determined to solve. You have a vivid imagination, my lady. I have functioning eyes, Miss Lockwood. Sophia set down her embroidery hoop. But what I don't understand is why you resist it. Any other woman in London would give her eye teeth for the Duke's attention. Jane sighed. Lady Sophia, Even if your observations were correct, which I do not concede, you must understand my position. I am a governess. His Grace is a duke. Society may tolerate his interest as a passing curiosity, but anything more would be. She trailed off, unable to articulate the impossible gulf between them. Would be what? Unprecedented? Scandalous. Sophia leaned forward eagerly. Isn't true love worth a little scandal? True love? Jane couldn't help but laugh. My lady, you've been reading too many novels. The Duke and I have exchanged perhaps 20 sentences in total. Some connections transcend words, Sophia insisted. Besides, Papa says you're a gentleman's daughter. That your father was a knight before. Jane's expression shuttered. Before he was convicted of embezzlement and died in debtor's prison? Yes, Lady Sophia, that part of my history is accurate. Sophia had the grace to look abashed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean, it's quite all right. Jane softened her tone. I'm not ashamed of my father. He made a terrible mistake trying to cover investment losses with client funds. He paid for that mistake with his life, and my mother and I paid with our position in society. It seems unfair that you should bear the consequences of actions not your own. Life is rarely fair, my lady. Now, shall we return to your stitches? That rose is coming along beautifully. The conversation ended there, but Jane's thoughts remained troubled. The Duke's attention, whatever its nature, was bringing her past uncomfortably close to the surface. It was only a matter of time before the whispers began in earnest. As if summoned by her fears, the first blow fell 3 days later at the Berkshires' musical evening. Jane was standing near a potted palm, watching Sophia charm a circle of young people, when she became aware of voices just behind her. Most inappropriate. A governess, for heaven's sake. And with that family history. Her father was transported for theft, I heard. Worse, he died in prison. Embezzlement. The Lockwood scandal, they called it. Nearly ruined dozens of good families. Does the Duke know, do you suppose? How could he not? Though perhaps he sees her as a diversion. Jane felt each word like a physical blow. She had known this was coming, yet the reality was still painful. Taking a deep breath, she stepped away, only to find her path blocked by Lady Marianne Pierce. Miss Lockwood. The beautiful widow's smile did not reach her eyes. How fortunate you must feel, to be included in such gatherings. Far above your station, I would have thought. Jane curtsied. Lady Pierce. I am here accompanying Lady Sophia. Of course. Lady Marianne glanced toward where Sophia stood, well surrounded by friends. Though your charge hardly seems to require your supervision at present. Nevertheless, it is my duty. Lady Marianne stepped closer, her voice dropping. Let me offer you some friendly advice, Miss Lockwood. Marcus, the Duke, has a habit of developing intellectual curiosities. Books, art, music, people. But curiosities, by their nature, hold his interest only briefly. Jane kept her expression neutral. I'm not sure why you're telling me this, my lady. Because you seem an intelligent woman, and I would hate to see you develop misconceptions about your place in His Grace's life. I assure you, I harbor no misconceptions about my place in anyone's life, Jane replied evenly. Lady Marianne studied her for a moment. Good. Then we understand each other. With a rustle of expensive silk, she moved away. Jane remained where she was, fighting to maintain her composure. She had always known her past would resurface eventually. That the Lockwood name, once respected in legal circles, now carried the taint of disgrace. What she hadn't anticipated was how much it would hurt to be reminded of it now, when, against all logic and propriety, she had allowed herself to care for a man so far above her reach. The Duke entered the room shortly thereafter, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. When his gaze found Jane, his expression softened slightly, and he began moving in her direction. Making a swift decision, Jane turned and slipped through a side door, seeking refuge in the relative quiet of the adjoining conservatory. The humid air, heavy with the scent of exotic blooms, enveloped her as she wound between palms and ferns. She needed a moment to collect herself, to rebuild the careful walls she had maintained these past 5 years. "Running away, Miss Lockwood." The Duke's deep voice came from behind her. "That seems unlike you." Jane turned, her heart racing. "Your Grace." "Forgive me, I needed some air." He studied her face intently. "You are troubled?" "It's nothing of consequence." "I disagree." He moved closer, his tall frame blocking her path back to the main rooms. "You've been avoiding me all evening." "I've been attending to my duties," Jane countered, though she couldn't quite meet his eyes. "Has something happened?" When she didn't respond, his voice hardened. "Who has upset you?" The genuine concern in his tone nearly undid her. "No one, Your Grace." "Truly?" "I am simply aware that my presence at these gatherings is causing comment." "Comment?" "About my background." "My father." Jane forced herself to look at him directly. "About your interest in me." Something flashed in his dark eyes. "I see. And this disturbs you?" "Shouldn't it? I am a governess, Your Grace. My reputation is all I possess. And you believe my attention threatens it?" Jane hesitated. "I believe that society will always seek the most malicious interpretation of any situation that defies convention." The Duke was silent for a long moment. "You are correct, of course. Society delights in nothing more than tearing down that which it does not understand." He took a step closer. "What society fails to comprehend, Miss Lockwood, is that I have never cared for its opinions." "A luxury afforded by your position," Jane replied softly. "Yes." His expression was grave. "A privilege I do not take lightly." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek without touching her. "I find myself in an unfamiliar position, Miss Lockwood. I am accustomed to taking what I want without explanation or apology." Jane's breath caught. "And what is it you want, Your Grace?" "You." The single word hung between them, charged with meaning. "Your conversation. Your insights. Your music." His voice lowered. "Your smile, which you bestow so rarely." Jane felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. "I am not free to give those things." "Because of your position? Or because of your past?" "Both." "Neither." Jane shook her head. "Because whatever this is between us can lead nowhere but disappointment." The Duke stepped back, his expression shuddering. "I see. You have made your position clear." "Your Grace, please understand, I understand perfectly, Miss Lockwood." His voice was formal once more. "Forgive my presumption. I shall not trouble you further." With a stiff bow, he was gone, leaving Jane alone among the tropical plants, their vibrant colors blurring through her unshed tears. The next week passed in a blur of ordinary duties. There were no more invitations, no more chance encounters with the Duke. Jane told herself it was for the best, that she had prevented a situation that could only have ended in heartbreak and humiliation. Then, on a particularly dreary Tuesday morning, disaster struck. "Have you seen this?" Sophia burst into the schoolroom, her face pale, clutching a copy of the Morning Gazette. Jane looked up from the lesson plan she was preparing. "My lady, what? It's dreadful." Sophia thrust the paper at her. Page 3. With growing dread, Jane turned to the indicated page. There, in the society column, was a paragraph that made her blood run cold. Society observers note with interest the recent absence of a certain governess from elite gatherings. Sources close to K. House report that the Duke's brief fascination with the daughter of the disgraced Sir Thomas L. has concluded, much to the relief of certain ladies with more appropriate aspirations. One wonders if the lady in question has returned to her proper place, or if her ambitions have merely been temporarily thwarted. readers will recall the scandal of 29 when Sir Thomas was convicted of misappropriating client funds exceeding £50,000, leading to his ignoble end in Marshalsea Prison. Jane set the paper down with trembling hands. I see. It's awful, Sophia said, perching on the edge of the desk. Who would write such things? Someone with a vested interest in ensuring I'm not seen as a threat, Jane replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Lady Marianne. Perhaps. Or simply the natural course of society's interest. Curiosities are fleeting, after all. Sophia frowned at her choice of words. This isn't right. The Duke must do nothing, Jane interrupted firmly. This will pass, Lady Sophia. Such gossip always does when a more interesting target presents itself. But your reputation was never particularly sterling to begin with, Jane finished with a sad smile. Now, shall we continue with our history lesson? I believe we were discussing the Tudor succession. Sophia reluctantly took her seat, though it was clear her mind remained far from 16th-century monarchs. Jane forced herself to focus on the lesson, refusing to dwell on the public humiliation or the pain of the Duke's absence. That afternoon, the Earl requested Jane's presence in his study. His expression was grave as she entered. Miss Lockwood, I assume you've seen today's Gazette. Yes, my lord. Jane kept her back straight, her hands clasped before her. The Earl sighed heavily. A most unfortunate publication. I want you to know that I do not put any stock in such gossip. Thank you, my lord. However, he continued reluctantly, I must consider Sophia's position. She makes her debut next season, and any hint of scandal. Jane's heart sank. I understand completely, my lord. I shall tender my resignation immediately. What? No. The Earl looked genuinely shocked. That is not at all what I meant to imply. Sophia adores you, and your influence has been nothing but positive. But the gossip will die down faster if we do not react to it. He gestured for her to sit. Miss Lockwood, I hired you because of your qualifications and character. The circumstances of your father's disgrace have never concerned me. What concerns me now is your well-being. Jane blinked in surprise. My well-being? Yes. I fear you have been placed in an uncomfortable position due to the Duke's attentions. I would understand if you wish to seek a position elsewhere, somewhere away from London society's prying eyes. Are you asking me to leave, my lord? No. I am offering you a choice. The Earl leaned forward. We depart for Westmoreland Park next week for the Christmas season. I had planned to ask if you might consider remaining in London with my sister to continue Sophia's studies, but perhaps the country would be a welcome respite for you as well. Relief washed over Jane. The country sounds wonderful, my lord. Good. The Earl smiled. And Miss Lockwood? Whatever transpired between you and the Duke, or did not transpire, please know that you have my highest regard and support. Thank you, my lord, Jane whispered, touched by his kindness. As she left the study, Jane felt a curious mixture of gratitude and sorrow. The Earl's support was more than she had dared hope for, yet the prospect of leaving London, of never seeing the Duke again, left an ache in her chest that she could not deny. Westmoreland Park, nestled in the rolling hills of Hampshire, was blanketed in snow when they arrived. The grand country house, with its centuries of history embedded in every stone, welcomed them with roaring fires and garlands of evergreen. Away from London, Jane found herself breathing more easily. Here, there were no prying eyes, no whispered comments, no painful reminders of what could never be. Sophia, too, seemed to thrive in the freedom of country life, her natural exuberance finding outlet in long walks and impromptu skating parties on the frozen lake. 3 days before Christmas, as snow fell gently outside, Jane sat at the pianoforte in the music room, playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The melancholy note suited her mood perfectly, contemplative, touched with sorrow, yet not without beauty. You play as though the composer wrote it for you personally, came a voice from the doorway. Jane's fingers stumbled on the keys as she turned to find the Duke of Kensington standing there, his tall frame silhouetted against the hall beyond. "Your Grace!" She rose quickly, her music forgotten. We had no word of your arrival. I came without announcement." He stepped into the room, removing his gloves. "Westmoreland and I have business to discuss, and I find myself wearied of London society at present." Jane curtsied. "I shall leave you to your privacy." "No." The word was quiet but commanding. "Please, continue playing. I have missed your music." Heart racing, Jane returned to the piano bench. "I'm afraid I'm rather out of practice." "Your out of practice surpasses most people's greatest efforts." The Duke moved to stand near the piano, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "I owe you an apology, Miss Lockwood." Jane's hand stilled on the keys. "You owe me nothing, Your Grace." "I disagree." He sat in the chair nearest the piano. "The article in the Gazette, that was my fault. My attention to you provoked jealousy in certain quarters." Lady Marianne. A wry smile touched his lips. "Your perception, as always, is accurate." She took exception to my interest in you. "A natural response, given your history." "Perhaps." The Duke leaned forward slightly. "What was not natural, or acceptable, was the deliberate attempt to cause you pain through public humiliation." "Such is the way of society," Jane replied, though the bitterness in her voice betrayed her. "It need not be." He studied her face. "I had words with the editor of the Gazette. There will be no further mentions of you or your family in its pages." Jane stared at him in surprise. "You did that for me?" "I would do considerably more, if permitted." His dark eyes held hers. "Miss Lockwood, Jane, I must speak plainly. My behavior these past weeks has been uncharacteristic." "So I've been told," Jane murmured. "Have you?" His lips quirked. "No doubt Lady Helena has provided a complete history of my temperament and habits. She may have mentioned your reputation for coolness." "The Winter Duke." He nodded. "A fitting epithet, until recently." "What changed?" The Duke rose and moved to stand beside her at the piano. "You happened, Jane Lockwood. You, with your quiet dignity and unexpected courage. Your brilliance, cloaked in modesty. Your music, which speaks what your words do not." Jane felt her cheeks flush. "Your Grace, Marcus," he corrected gently. "My name is Marcus." "Marcus." The name felt intimate on her tongue. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll forgive my presumption in the conservatory. Say you'll allow me to court you properly, without secrecy or shame." Jane stood, needing to put some distance between them. "Court me?" "Your Grace, Marcus, you cannot be serious. I am a governess. The daughter of a disgraced man who died in debtor's prison." "You are Jane Lockwood," he replied simply. "The woman who has awakened feelings I had thought long buried. The rest is immaterial. To you, perhaps. Not to society. Damn society." There was a fierceness in his voice that startled her. "I have spent my entire life conforming to expectations, being the perfect heir, the perfect duke, the perfect guardian of the Kensington legacy. For what? An empty house filled with treasures I cannot share? A title that commands respect but permits no happiness." "You speak as though I am the answer to your isolation," Jane said softly. "I am not." "No?" He moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Then explain to me why, for the first time in my adult life, I find myself thinking of someone other than myself. Why I cannot hear a piece of music without wondering what you would think of it. Why the thought of you suffering even a moment's embarrassment on my account is intolerable to me." "This is madness," Jane whispered, though her heart pounded with hope she dared not acknowledge. "Perhaps." His hand came up to hover near her cheek, still not touching her. "Or perhaps it is the first sane choice I have made in years." The door opened suddenly, and the Earl of Westmoreland entered. He stopped short at the tableau before him. "Ah, Kensington. I see you found our music room." His tone was neutral, though his eyes moved perceptibly between them. "Westmoreland." The Duke stepped back, his expression smoothly returning to its usual aristocratic reserve. "Miss Lockwood was kind enough to play for me while I awaited your return." "Indeed?" The Earl nodded to Jane. "Miss Lockwood, I believe Sophia was looking for you." "Something about her French composition?" "Of course, my lord." Jane curtsied to both men and hurried from the room, her mind whirling with the Duke's words and the impossible future they suggested. The following day brought fresh snow and a strained atmosphere at breakfast. The Duke and the Earl were engaged in quiet conversation at one end of the table, while Sophia peppered Jane with questions about the unexpected visitor. "Did you know he was coming?" she whispered, spreading jam on her toast. "Papa said it was a complete surprise." "I had no idea," Jane replied truthfully. "And he sought you out immediately," Sophia observed with poorly concealed glee. "In the music room." "Alone?" "Lady Sophia, please." Jane glanced toward the gentleman. Nothing improper occurred. "More's the pity," Sophia muttered, earning a sharp look from her governess. After breakfast, the Earl announced plans for a shooting party with neighboring gentlemen. The Duke would join them, naturally, while the ladies were invited to accompany Lady Horacefield and her daughters on a visit to the village. "Actually," the Duke interjected smoothly, "I wondered if Miss Lockwood might be persuaded to show me the picture gallery. I understand Westmoreland Park boasts several Gainsboroughs of note." The Earl hesitated, glancing at Jane. "Miss Lockwood?" "I would be happy to, my lord," she replied, keeping her voice even despite her racing heart. "With your permission, of course." "Very well." The Earl nodded, though his expression remained concerned. "Sophia, you will accompany Lady Horacefield as planned." Sophia pouted but did not argue. Soon after, the gentlemen departed for their shooting expedition, the Earl promising to return by mid-afternoon to join the Duke and Jane for their tour of the gallery. Jane spent the morning in a state of nervous anticipation. She chose her simplest day dress, a modest creation of deep burgundy wool, and arranged her hair in its usual neat coil. Whatever the Duke's intentions, she would not give the appearance of having designs on him. At precisely 1 o'clock, she made her way to the grand entrance hall, where Marcus awaited her. He wore riding clothes, though there was no evidence he had actually been shooting with the others. "Miss Lockwood." His face brightened visibly at the sight of her. "Thank you for agreeing to this tour." "I am happy to oblige, Your Grace." Jane kept her tone formal, acutely aware of the footman standing nearby. "Shall we begin in the East Wing? I believe that's where the oldest portraits are housed." Jane nodded, and they set off through the grand house. For the first quarter hour, they maintained the pretense of an art tour, with Jane dutifully pointing out notable paintings and sharing what little she knew of their history. "This is Lady Elizabeth Westmoreland, the Earl's great-grandmother," she explained, pausing before a portrait of a handsome woman in riding habit. She was famous for her horsemanship and supposedly rode side-saddle in the Oxford hunt well into her 70s. "Remarkable," Marcus murmured, though his eyes were fixed on Jane rather than the painting. "And this one?" He gestured to a landscape. "I believe it's by Claude Lorraine, though I'm not certain." Jane studied the pastoral scene. "It depicts the Roman Campagna, I think." "You have an excellent eye." The Duke moved slightly closer. "Tell me, Jane, are you actually interested in these paintings, or are you simply humoring me?" Jane couldn't help but smile. "A bit of both, I confess. Art has always been a passion, though I'm no expert." "Another shared interest, then." His voice softened. "Along with music, literature, and an appreciation for directness." Jane turned to face him fully. "Your Grace, Marcus, what are we doing?" "Ostensibly, touring the gallery." "In reality?" He reached for her hand, holding it lightly. "I am courting you, Jane Lockwood, as I should have done from the beginning." "Here?" In Westmoreland Park. Here. In London. Wherever you are. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I had business with Westmoreland, it's true. But I came because you were here, and I could not bear another day without seeing you. Jane felt dizzy with the intensity of his gaze, the warmth of his touch. This cannot possibly work. You know that. Why not? He released her hand but remained close. Because of your father's past? Because you are employed as a governess? These are circumstances, Jane, not insurmountable obstacles. Society would never accept a duchess with my background. Society will accept what I tell it to accept. There was steel in his voice. I am not proposing we defy convention entirely. There would be a proper courtship, a suitable period of engagement. Your connection to the Earl's household gives you standing enough for propriety's sake. Jane stared at him, stunned by the methodical way he had considered their situation. You've thought this through. Extensively. A smile touched his lips. I am known for my thoroughness in business matters. Why would I approach the most important decision of my life with less care? The most important? Jane shook her head in wonderment. Marcus, you hardly know me. I know enough. He took her hand again, this time raising it to his lips. I know you are intelligent, principled, and kind. I know you play Mozart when you're contemplative and Beethoven when you're sad. I know you love Sophia as though she were your own sister. I know you bear your reduced circumstances with dignity that humbles me. His words washed over her like a benediction, healing wounds she hadn't realized were still raw. And I know, he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, that when I am with you, I am not the Duke of Kensington, or the Winter Duke, or any of the other titles society has bestowed upon me. I am simply a man who has found, against all expectation, the woman he wishes to share his life with. Jane felt tears pricking at her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it. His dark eyes searched hers. Say you feel even a fraction of what I feel. I? Jane hesitated, then decided that nothing but complete honesty would do. I have tried very hard not to care for you. I've reminded myself of all the reasons it's impossible. I've recited every objection society would raise. And yet? He prompted gently when she faltered. And yet I find myself thinking of you constantly. Missing your conversation. Wondering what you would think of a book I'm reading or a piece I'm playing. She drew a shaky breath. I care for you far more than is wise or proper. The smile that broke across his face transformed him. Gone was the austere Duke, replaced by a man of flesh and blood and undisguised joy. That is all I needed to hear. He raised her hand to his lips once more. The rest we will face together. The sound of approaching footsteps caused them to step apart. The Earl rounded the corner, looking somewhat harried. Ah, there you are. I apologize for the delay. The shooting party ran longer than expected. His eyes moved between them, noting their flushed faces and bright eyes. Have I interrupted? Not at all, Marcus replied smoothly. Miss Lockwood was just explaining the provenance of this Lorraine. Most illuminating. The Earl's expression suggested he wasn't fooled in the slightest. Indeed. Well, shall we continue the tour together? The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of paintings, sculptures, and careful conversation. Though they maintained a proper distance, Jane was acutely aware of Marcus's presence, his subtle glances, the occasional brush of his hand against hers when the Earl was distracted. That evening, as the household gathered in the drawing-room after dinner, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. Sophia, having returned from her village excursion, watched Jane and the Duke with barely disguised excitement. The Earl seemed preoccupied, frequently glancing between his guest and his daughter's governess. When Jane rose to retire for the night, Marcus stood as well. Miss Lockwood, might I have a word with you before you go? A question about that Mozart sonata you mentioned earlier. The Earl frowned. Surely any musical inquiries can wait until morning, Kensington. "It's quite all right, my lord," Jane assured him. "I don't mind." With visible reluctance, the Earl nodded his permission. Marcus guided Jane to the far corner of the room, near the piano, where they could speak with some privacy while remaining in full view of the others. "I must return to London tomorrow," he said without preamble. Jane's heart sank. "So soon? Parliament reconvenes after the holiday, and I have matters that require my attention." His expression softened. "But I would like to correspond with you, if you're willing." "Correspond?" "Letters, Jane." A smile played at his lips. "A traditional component of courtship, I believe." "You're serious about this?" she marveled. "About courting me?" "Entirely serious." His voice dropped. "I would ask for your hand this very moment if I thought you'd accept." Jane's breath caught. "Marcus." "I won't rush you," he promised. "Take the time you need to become accustomed to the idea. Write to me. Let me write to you. When you return to London, we can proceed more formally." "And the Earl? Have you spoken to him?" "Not yet. I wanted your agreement first." His eyes held hers. "Do I have it?" Jane knew she stood at a crossroads. Behind her lay the safety of her current life, respectable, if humble. Before her stretched an unknown future with this man who had upended every expectation. "Yes," she whispered, choosing courage over caution. "Yes, you have my agreement." The smile he gave her then was worth any risk. The following morning, Jane rose early, hoping for a moment alone with Marcus before his departure. She found him in the library, already dressed for travel. "I hoped to see you before I left," he said, closing the book he'd been perusing. "I wanted to wish you safe travels." Jane remained near the door, maintaining a proper distance. "And to thank you for everything." "No thanks are necessary." He moved closer, his expression serious. "I spoke with Westmoreland last night, after you retired." Jane's eyes widened. "What did he say?" "He expressed concern for your reputation and future. He also questioned whether I had fully considered the implications of attaching myself to a woman in your position." "All valid concerns," Jane murmured. "Indeed." "And I addressed them as honestly as I could." Marcus's lips curved slightly. "I believe I won him over when I pointed out that I have never in my life acted impulsively, and that my interest in you is the result of careful consideration, not passing fancy." "Very logical," Jane said, unable to suppress a smile. "I am a logical man." He reached for her hand. "In most matters." "And in this?" She allowed him to take her fingers in his. "In this, I find logic and emotion in perfect alignment." He brushed his thumb across her knuckles. "My head and heart agree, you are extraordinary, Jane Lockwood, and I would be a fool to let convention stand between us." From the doorway came the sound of a throat clearing. The Earl stood there, his expression unreadable. "The carriage is ready, Kensington." Marcus released Jane's hand reluctantly. "Thank you, Westmoreland." "I'll be right there." The Earl hesitated. "Miss Lockwood, might I have a word with you after His Grace's departure?" "In my study." "Of course, my lord," Jane replied, her stomach tightening with apprehension. After the Earl withdrew, Marcus turned back to Jane. "Don't worry. He's not angry, merely concerned." "Rightfully so," Jane sighed. "This affects his household as well." "True." Marcus took both her hands in his. "Jane, whatever happens, know that my intentions are honorable and my feelings sincere. I will write to you from London." "And I shall reply," she promised. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers. "Until we meet again." With that, he was gone, leaving Jane to face the Earl and whatever consequences might follow. The Earl's study was warm, a fire crackling in the grate despite the early hour. Jane stood before his desk, hands clasped tightly before her. "Miss Lockwood." The Earl gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Jane perched on the edge of the seat. "My lord, I understand you must have concerns, indeed I do." The Earl leaned back, regarding her thoughtfully. "The Duke of Kensington has informed me of his intention to court you, with the ultimate goal of marriage." "Yes, my lord. This puts me in a rather unusual position, as your employer and as the Duke's friend." He tapped his fingers on the desk. "I must consider what is best for all concerned, including Sophia, who has grown quite attached to you." "I would never wish to cause disruption to your household, my lord," Jane said earnestly. "If you feel I should resign my position, that is not my immediate concern." The Earl waved a hand dismissively. "Though eventually, arrangements would need to be made for Sophia's continued education." "Of course. My concern, Miss Lockwood, is whether you fully understand what you would be undertaking as the Duchess of Kensington." His expression grew serious. "The scrutiny would be intense. The tongue can be merciless to those they perceive as overreaching their station." "I am well aware of society's capacity for cruelty, my lord," Jane replied quietly. "Yes, I suppose you are." The Earl's face softened. "I knew your father, you know." "Not well, but we moved in some of the same circles before his difficulties." Jane looked up in surprise. "You never mentioned that." "It seemed unkind to raise the subject." The Earl sighed. "He was a good man who made a catastrophic error in judgment. His punishment far exceeded his crime, in my opinion." "Thank you for saying so," Jane whispered, touched by his understanding. "What I mean to convey, Miss Lockwood, is that I have no personal objection to your elevation. If the Duke has chosen you, he has chosen well." The Earl leaned forward. "But I would be remiss if I did not ensure you are prepared for the challenges ahead." "I appreciate your concern, my lord. The Duke is a formidable ally, but even his influence has limits. There will be those who never accept you." The Earl's expression was grave. "Can you bear that burden?" Jane considered his question carefully. "I believe I can, my lord. I have lived with society's judgment since my father's disgrace. The difference now would be having someone, worth enduring it for." The Earl studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. You have my blessing, for whatever it may be worth. And my continued employment, should the Duke's intentions falter." "Thank you, my lord." Jane rose, relief washing over her. "That means a great deal. You are a remarkable young woman, Miss Lockwood." The Earl smiled. "The Duke is fortunate indeed." The weeks that followed were a revelation for Jane. True to his word, Marcus wrote to her, thoughtful, elegant letters that revealed a depth of feeling and intellect that only increased her regard for him. She replied with equal candor, sharing thoughts and observations she had never dared express to another soul. In the protective cocoon of Westmoreland Park, far from London's prying eyes, Jane allowed herself to imagine a future as the Duchess of Kensington. It still seemed fantastical, a fairy tale rather than a possibility, yet with each passing day, each letter exchanged, it took on greater solidity in her mind. Sophia, of course, was ecstatic at the developments. "I knew it. From the very first ball, I told you he couldn't look away from you." "You're a dreadful romantic," Jane chided, though she couldn't suppress her smile. "And you're going to be a duchess." Sophia twirled around the schoolroom. "Oh, Miss Lockwood, it's like something from a novel." "Nothing is certain yet," Jane cautioned. "And we must be discreet when we return to London. No gossip, no speculation." Sophia placed a hand over her heart. "I shall be the very soul of discretion." Jane doubted this sincerely, but appreciated the sentiment. As January drew to a close, the Earl announced their imminent return to London for the parliamentary session. Jane received the news with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She longed to see Marcus again, yet feared the scrutiny that would inevitably follow once they were seen together in society. The night before their departure, a letter arrived for Jane, different from Marcus's usual correspondence, the envelope bearing the formal Kensington seal. Inside, she found a brief note in his familiar handwriting: "My dearest Jane, upon your return to London, you will find certain arrangements have been made. Trust me in this, as in all things. With deepest affection. Marcus puzzled, Jane showed the note to the Earl, who merely smiled enigmatically. I believe you'll understand when we arrive, was all he would say. The Westmoreland carriage rolled into London on a crisp February morning. As they approached the Earl's townhouse, Jane noticed an unusual number of people gathered on the street, servants, delivery boys, and what appeared to be reporters from the society papers. What on earth? Sophia pressed her face to the window. The Earl chuckled. I believe the Duke's arrangements are about to become clear. As their carriage stopped, the small crowd surged forward. The Earl's footman created a path to the door, while the curious onlookers craned their necks for a glimpse inside the vehicle. My lord, Jane whispered, alarmed, what is happening? Politics, Miss Lockwood, the Earl replied cryptically. Or, more accurately, the Duke's particular brand of social maneuvering. They were ushered quickly into the house, where the butler presented the Earl with several calling cards and a copy of the morning's Gazette. I believe you'll want to see this right away, my lord, he murmured, casting a significant glance at Jane. The Earl unfolded the paper, scanned its contents, and let out a startled laugh. Well, well. Kensington certainly doesn't believe in half measures. What is it, Papa? Sophia demanded, trying to peek at the paper. See for yourself. He handed the Gazette to Jane, who felt the blood drain from her face as she read the prominent society announcement. His Grace, the Duke of Kensington, announces his intention to court Miss Jane Lockwood, daughter of the late Sir Thomas Lockwood and currently governess to Lady Sophia Westmoreland. The Duke requests privacy and courtesy be extended to Miss Lockwood during this period. Those who cannot comply with this reasonable expectation may consider their invitations to Kensington House events permanently rescinded. Good heavens, Jane breathed, sinking onto a nearby chair. He's announced it publicly. And quite definitively, the Earl observed. Note the thinly veiled threat at the end. The Duke rarely issues ultimatums, but when he does, society listens. But why? Jane looked up, bewildered. This will cause a sensation. Precisely. The Earl nodded approvingly. He's controlling the narrative, Miss Lockwood. By announcing his intentions openly and with such authority, he transforms what might have been a scandal into a romantic declaration. Quite clever, really. It's magnificent. Sophia exclaimed, reading over Jane's shoulder. Like a royal proclamation. The Duke does nothing by halves, the Earl agreed. I suspect you'll find your position in society has changed rather dramatically, Miss Lockwood. As if to confirm his words, the butler reappeared with a silver tray bearing a small fortune in calling cards. The first of many, I expect, the Earl said, examining them. Lady Helena Kittredge, the Countess of Dunmore, Lady Pembroke, all requesting the pleasure of Miss Lockwood's company at their earliest convenience. But these are the same women who barely acknowledged my existence before, Jane said in disbelief. And now they seek your favor. The Earl's eyes twinkled. Such is the power of ducal approval. A footman entered, carrying an enormous bouquet of hothouse roses. For Miss Lockwood, my lord. From Kensington House. Behind him came another servant with a small package. Also for Miss Lockwood, my lord. Jane accepted both with trembling hands. The package contained a note and a small velvet box. Opening the latter, she gasped at the sight of an exquisite pearl and diamond pendant in an antique setting. The note read simply, a token of my esteem. The Kensington pearls have adorned the necks of duchesses for generations. They have never looked more at home than they will on you. I await your permission to call. Yours, M. Oh my, Sophia breathed, peering at the jewels. Those are magnificent. Jane closed the box carefully. This is happening rather fast. The Duke is known for his decisiveness, the Earl said. Once his mind is made up, he acts with characteristic thoroughness. What should I do? Jane looked to the Earl for guidance. He smiled kindly. I believe that depends entirely on what you want, Miss Lockwood. What she wanted. Such a simple question, yet Jane had spent so many years suppressing her own desires that she scarcely knew how to answer it. Did she want this new life that Marcus offered? The privileges, yes, but also the scrutiny, the responsibility, the inevitable criticism? And more importantly, did she want him? The man behind the title, with his intensity and intelligence, his unexpected tenderness and formidable will? I want. Jane took a deep breath. I want to see him. To speak with him directly before this goes any further. The Earl nodded approvingly. A sensible approach. Shall I send word to Kensington House? Please. Jane gathered her composure. And I should like to change my dress before he arrives. Sophia giggled. I'll help you choose something. Oh, this is the most exciting thing that's ever happened in this house. As the young girl pulled Jane toward the stairs, the Earl called after them, Miss Lockwood? Remember that while titles and fortunes matter in our world, they are poor substitutes for genuine affection. Make certain your heart guides your decision. Jane turned back with a grateful smile. I will, my lord. Thank you. 2 hours later, Jane sat in the Earl's formal drawing room, wearing her best day dress of deep green silk, a Christmas gift from the Earl and Sophia. The Kensington pearls rested at her throat, their weight unfamiliar yet somehow right. When Marcus was announced, Jane rose, her heart hammering in her chest. He entered with his usual commanding presence, though she detected a hint of uncertainty in his eyes as he bowed over her hand. Miss Lockwood. You look lovely. Your Grace. She curtsied. Thank you for the beautiful gift. Though I'm not certain I should accept something so valuable. They belong with you. His gaze lingered on the pearls. As I hoped they would. The Earl, who had been standing by the fireplace, cleared his throat. I believe I have correspondence requiring my attention. You'll excuse me. Once they were alone, Marcus moved closer. You're angry about the announcement. Not angry, Jane corrected. Overwhelmed. You've changed my life irrevocably with a few lines in the Gazette. I had to act decisively. His expression was unapologetic. The alternatives were worse: whispers, speculation, gradual exposure to society scrutiny. This way, my position is clear from the outset. Your position, yes. Jane met his gaze steadily. But what of mine? Did it not occur to you that I might have preferred a more gradual introduction to society as, whatever it is I am to you? My future wife, he said without hesitation. If you'll have me. The directness of his statement stole her breath. Marcus. I know it seems precipitous. He took her hands in his. But I've never been more certain of anything. These past weeks, your letters. Jane, you've shown me a kind of happiness I never thought possible. Through letters, she pointed out. We've spent so little time in each other's company. Then let us remedy that. He squeezed her fingers gently. Allow me to court you properly. Let me prove that what exists between us is real and lasting. Jane studied his face, the strong features that had once seemed so austere now dear and familiar. You understand that society will talk regardless of your proclamation? That there will always be those who consider me an opportunist or worse. Let them talk. His voice hardened. I care only for your happiness and comfort. The rest is noise. Such confidence, Jane murmured, a smile tugging at her lips despite her concerns. Has anyone ever denied you anything you truly wanted? Many times. His expression softened. But never anything that mattered as much as this. As much as you. Jane felt the last of her resistance melting away. This impossible man, with his commanding presence and unexpected vulnerability, had somehow breached the careful walls she had built around her heart. Very well, she said softly. Court me, Marcus Kensington. Show me that this fairy tale can withstand reality. The smile that transformed his face was worth any risk, any scandal that might follow. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her fingers. You will not regret this, Jane. I swear it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of new experiences for Jane. True to his word, Marcus courted her with all the propriety and attention a duke might bestow on the highest-born lady in the land. There were chaperoned drives in the park, visits to art exhibitions, musical evenings at Kensington House where Jane found herself the guest of honor rather than the governess lingering in the shadows. Throughout it all, the Earl and Sophia provided support and companionship, ensuring that Jane was never left to face society alone. To Jane's surprise, Lady Helena Kittredge emerged as her most formidable ally. The Dowager Countess took it upon herself to accompany Jane to various social functions, her aristocratic presence and razor-sharp tongue deterring even the most determined gossips. "The ton respects two things above all else," Lady Helena explained during a carriage ride. "Power and entertainment value. The Duke provides the former, my dear, and I the latter. Between us, we shall ensure your acceptance." "I'm grateful for your support, Lady Helena," Jane said sincerely. "Though I wonder at your reasons." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "Let's call it enlightened self-interest. I've watched Marcus Kensington grow from a solemn boy into an even more solemn man. In you, he has found something I feared he never would, joy. That alone would earn you my allegiance. Not everyone was so welcoming, of course." Lady Marianne Pierce made her displeasure known through thinly veiled insults whenever they encountered each other in society. Certain matrons with unmarried daughters viewed Jane with undisguised hostility. And there were always whispers, glances, the occasional cruel remark just loud enough to be overheard. But for every slight, there seemed to be a compensating kindness. The Foreign Secretary's wife invited Jane to her literary salon. The Duchess of Pembroke requested Jane's assistance with a charity musicale. Gradually, tentatively, Jane found herself being integrated into the very society that had once excluded her. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. His affection, expressed in countless small gestures and attentions, never wavered. In his presence, Jane discovered a confidence she had thought lost forever, a sense that she was valued not despite her past, but as the complete person her experiences had shaped her to be. On a mild evening in late March, Marcus invited Jane to walk with him in the gardens of Kensington House. Lady Helena, their nominal chaperone, tactfully remained on the terrace, well within sight but beyond earshot. "You seem pensive tonight," Jane observed as they strolled among early spring blooms. "Do I?" Marcus smiled down at her. "Perhaps I'm simply savoring the moment." "It is a beautiful evening," Jane agreed, breathing in the scent of hyacinths. "Made more so by your presence." He guided her toward a stone bench partially concealed by flowering shrubs. "Jane, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes?" "These past weeks." He took her hands in his. "Have they convinced you of the sincerity of my regard? Of the possibility of happiness between us?" "They have," Jane admitted softly. "Though I still marvel at the unlikelihood of it all." "Not unlikely. Inevitable." His dark eyes held hers. "From the moment I saw you at the winter ball, standing apart from the crowd yet somehow more present than anyone else in the room, I knew you were extraordinary." "You couldn't possibly have known any such thing," Jane protested with a smile. "You hadn't even spoken to me." "Some things require no words, Jane." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Some connections exist before conscious recognition." "Now you sound like Sophia and her romantic novels," Jane teased, though her voice trembled slightly. Marcus laughed, the sound rich and warm in the evening air. "Perhaps your young charge has the right of it." His expression grew serious once more. "Jane Lockwood, I love you. Not as a curiosity or a novelty, but as the woman who has awakened my heart from a slumber I didn't know it was in." Jane felt tears prick at her eyes. "Marcus." "I had planned a more elaborate speech," he continued, with references to poetry and philosophy. "But in the end, simplicity seems best." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a ring of such breathtaking beauty that Jane gasped. A large sapphire, surrounded by diamonds, gleamed in the fading light. It was my mother's, Marcus explained. The only piece of jewelry she valued above all others. Like the pearls, it belongs with you now. Jane looked from the ring to his face, seeing in his eyes all the love and certainty she had scarcely dared to hope for. In that moment, the last of her doubts fell away. This man, this proud, complex, tender-hearted Duke, loved her, Jane Lockwood, with all her flaws and history. And she loved him in return, with a depth that surprised and humbled her. Yes, she whispered, her voice gaining strength as she continued. Yes, Marcus Kensington, I will marry you. Not for your title or fortune, but for the man you are, the man only I seem privileged to truly see. The smile that illuminated his face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips. You honor me beyond words, he murmured against her skin. From the terrace came the sound of applause. Lady Helena, apparently having moved close enough to witness the proposal, was clapping enthusiastically. And beside her stood the Earl and Sophia, the latter practically jumping with excitement. I may have informed them of my intentions, Marcus admitted with a rueful smile. Westmoreland insisted on being present for Sophia's sake. She threatened to never speak to him again if she missed this moment. Jane laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. I wouldn't have expected anything less. As they walked back to join their friends, Jane glanced down at the sapphire glittering on her finger, a tangible symbol of the extraordinary journey that had brought her from the shadows of the winter ball to this moment of perfect happiness. Are you happy? Marcus asked softly, following her gaze. Completely, Jane replied, raising her face to his. And you? More than I ever imagined possible. He squeezed her hand. And this is only the beginning. As the evening stars emerged above Kensington House, Jane knew he was right. This was indeed just the beginning of their story, a story that had started with a shy governess catching a duke's eye across a crowded ballroom, and would continue, God willing, through a lifetime of days and nights together. Sometimes, it seemed, even the most unlikely fairy tales could come true.